So our top story this morning, leaked messages have suggested that the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, rejected the advice of the Chief Medical Officer to test all residents entering care homes.
Well, the Telegraph newspaper alleges that Chris Whitty gave the advice about a month into the pandemic, but Mr Hancock did not follow the guidance, telling advisers it risked muddying the waters.
Well, Mr Hancock has denied the allegations, saying the WhatsApps present a distorted account, and he's reportedly considering all options available to him in response.
Joining us now from Spiked magazine, Fraser Myers on this one. Well, the Telegraph going big. It's an exclusive for them. Fraser, what do you make of this?
I mean, this is an extraordinary allegation. I think, let's cast our mind back to the pandemic. This was probably the treatment of care homes and the treatment of elderly and vulnerable people in care homes was probably, I would say, the biggest scandal of that period. Essentially, elderly people were thrown to the wolves. Early on in the pandemic, the guidance suggested that elderly people didn't need to be tested if they were discharged from hospital. It even said, actually, that if you tested positive, you could be discharged from hospital and be sent into a care home. And now we're learning that once that advice was updated to correct for that egregious mistake, Chris Whitty was advising that everyone going into a care home should be tested, and Matt Hancock rejected that, which is extraordinary.
Why would he have objected that? I mean, this term that he uses, this would risk muddying the waters.
So Hancock's priority at the time was to essentially bump up the numbers of people getting tested, and the advice to the general public was that you should only get tested if you have COVID symptoms. So he was suggesting essentially that people who were asymptomatic or didn't have symptoms shouldn't be tested. Now, clearly, if you know that you have a vulnerable population, like people in care homes, that surely is where all the testing resources should go, rather than to say, people who are perhaps less vulnerable, people who just might be interested to know whether they have COVID or not.
Well, the Telegraph also alleges that Chris Whitty advised that patients should be segregated until the results came back, which apparently didn't happen as well. So that's another one of the accusations being made. Just explain, look, we haven't seen these messages ourselves. These are messages that have come to light whilst a journalist, Isabel Oakeshott, had been preparing for a book. And tell us why she's decided to publish them and what exactly has Matt Hancock's response been to that whilst we've been asleep overnight.
So she says she's decided to publish some of these, not all of them, because she was working on Matt Hancock's diaries, his pandemic diaries. A lot of these messages will have been taken out just for space. Some of them will have been suppressed. The Cabinet Office will have said you're not allowed to publish X, Y, Z because it implicates certain people. There are rules as to what former Cabinet Ministers are allowed to write in their books. So there will have been plenty of other messages hanging over that didn't make it into that book. That book was actually quite revealing. It didn't, pull its punches in a lot of ways. So there isn't really a suggestion that Hancock was keeping that many secrets. But she wants to come forward with this information now because she fears, quite rightly, that the COVID inquiry could take forever. I mean, it hasn't even started taking verbal evidence yet. And a lot of other countries have already wrapped up their inquiries. The Swedish inquiry is already done and dusted. So
essentially she would be using sort of public interest defence in releasing this information. Well, I want to just bring our viewers and listeners the response from Mr Hancock. He's told that a source close to him has told the Press Association overnight that the Telegraph headline is wrong, that Matt is considering all options available to him, and he goes on to say the proper place for analysis like this is in the inquiry, not a partial agenda-driven leak of confidential documents. So that row then is going to be huge between those two parties. But as I say, the public interest argument will be made by Isabel Oakeshott.
Yeah, and the problem with an inquiry is that often they're actually not the best means to get to the truth. Sometimes they're a way for politicians to, kick these issues into the long grass. I mean, the fact is that we're talking about this, several months now after Hancock's left public life. It would have been nice to know these things at the time even, so that we could scrutinise his record properly during the pandemic. But a lot of these things remain secret.
So we're not talking about official governmental or interdepartmental emails here, right? So the messages that we're talking about, would these have been private messages, and can we speculate as to how Isabel Oakeshott would have come into possession of these?
Well, she was... so essentially what happened was Matt Hancock gave them to her. He downloaded all of his archived messages so that they could write the pandemic diaries together, and he gave them to her. And now some of them are only just seeing the light of day, essentially. I guess the thing is with WhatsApp messages, with private messages like that, they're not subject to freedom of information requests. So that's why this leak is quite significant, because if there's official emails, as you're saying, between between the different departments, between ministers, those can be legitimately, or they have to be given up if you ask for them. They can't suddenly be exempt from the inquiry. They can't be exempt from press scrutiny. But a lot of government business is done through these kinds of WhatsApp channels and things like that, which are kept secret until they're leaked.
As Isabel says, Mr. Hancock, he rejects all of this. We suspect it will go further than there'll be more to this than we're reading today. But the optics aren't good for Mr. Hancock, are they?
No, I don't think so. I think that he's looks a fairly risible figure, especially since leaving office. I mean, people will remember him appearing on I'm a Celebrity. Didn't do his reputation a whole lot of good, I wouldn't say. And I think, let's not forget he left the position of Health Minister in disgrace with his affair. Caught on camera, splashed all over the tabloids.
While breaking COVID rules was
breaking the rules that he himself insisted on. So, I didn't think that Matt Hancock's reputation was ever going to be rescued necessarily, but this is, just got even worse. OK.
This is the big news. This is a Daily Telegraph exclusive. There it is, front of the paper. And we'll be discussing that in our newspaper review with Scarlett Maguire and David Mellor.